And welcome back to Football Weather. New intro music, new intro video for those of you
Love
watching
it.
on YouTube. Just trying to mix it up a little bit here as we hit our stride. As we wrap up the month of September and we wrap up the first full month of college football play, we got a hell of a weekend that we have to go back and dissect. And then we got some games coming up this week that are quite intriguing we're going to look at as well. But Matt Blaszka joining me here. I'm Galen Clavio. Matt, great to see you. I just got back late last night from Iowa as I watched Indiana win that game. You got a chance to watch a ton of games at home throughout the course of the day yesterday. It was the first really full slate of college football weekend and a real nice tasting menu for what we're going to get in October and November.
Yeah, it certainly felt like the quad box didn't do its justice until, it definitely did justice all day. But once you got to that Sunday night window with Penn State and Oregon, and then you had Georgia and Alabama, you really felt like you hit the stride of like you mentioned, the college football season. And at times I was going between 2 and 4 boxes. I'm like, it was, and then they both basically ended almost at the same exact time. So we're getting there. I think certainly our rankings certainly showed some differences, but I think we're starting to see where those results are really starting to matter. We'll talk about that later, but certainly we're hitting that point where we're having something matter.
Yes, I think we're starting to get a little bit of a crystallization about who's actually good, who's only good because people think that they're supposed to be good, and who's not actually good. And so, as always, we're going to have the football weather merit poll coming up a little later on in this episode. We're also going to be talking about scheduling in general amongst the Power Four and maybe where that ends up going, as there was some news about that this week. We're going to talk about the results, Big Ten, some road wins that were important for some contending teams, and then also the SEC already starting to beat itself up a little bit. And then, of course, we're going to preview what's going on here in Week 6, which is upcoming. First of all, quick note, we are brought to you by Homefield Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions, the softest fabrics, the coolest designs, and a continual rollout of just an awesome tour of college football going on, brought to you by Modelo and Homefield everywhere here during the college football season. Saw a ton of Homefield up in Iowa City yesterday as well. You can go to homefieldapparel.com, use the code HOME23, get 15% off your first order. So be sure to do that and let them know that we sent you here from Football Weather. Also, just a reminder, we are on YouTube as part of the Back Home Network, so check us out on YouTube. Just search Back Home Network on YouTube. You can get updates about when shows go live. We haven't done a live football weather yet. We might at some point, but not today. This is definitely recorded, but you can catch all the shows on the Back Home Network on the Back Home Network YouTube channel, so be sure to check out the fine family of programming that we have there for sports fans and culture fans of all stripes. All right, well, let's dive right into it and kind of hit on the big games and what we think we learned perhaps from some of what we saw in Week 6. Let's start with the big ones that closed the week. And I think we need to start with the Oregon-Penn State game. This was a game that Oregon, at least in my mind, felt like they were going to be the superior team, largely because of the question marks around Penn State's offense and just the fact that, neither of them have played that impressive of schedules coming into this one, but at least Oregon had played teams that were in the power conferences.
Right.
They had played games on the road. Penn State had played very, very poor competition. And for the first 3 quarters, it kind of played out that way. Oregon just kind of took bits and pieces of things, got themselves out to a lead. And then Penn State managed to come all the way back, tied it up, scored first in overtime, ends up losing in double overtime. What did you take out of this game, Matt? I mean, what do we learn from both teams? Where are they both right now in terms of the playoff and in national title contention? Like, what was your impression of both the Ducks and the Lions?
My first impression is it's like doomsday again for Penn State. Watching that game, watching them, that and the Alabama game together, and watching them scrounge 100 yards through the first 3 quarters, like they have never thrown a pass or they weren't ready for this game. You had 10 months or 9 months to prepare for this game. Your first 3 games were a bunch of, Villanovas and whatever. That's fine. It just looked like they were unprepared again. And then they fall down 17-3 and Dante Moore hats off to him. He looked fantastic. What a great player he's going to be. He's going to be a real problem for the Big Ten going forward. But then they make the comeback, and you're like, maybe they actually pull this off. And I actually said they should have went for 2 at the end of regulation. They had Oregon on the run. They had the ball for the last half hour of that game. It seemed like with the timeouts and the time of possession. And then Drew Aller, he brought him back, and he throws that interception. You're just like, here we go again with Penn State. You don't want to put it all on James Franklin, but when it keeps happening, there's something just not right here. You had the opportunity to do this and actually pull this off after really not playing well. Like I said, 100 yards in 3 quarters. I mean, that's bad, right? And they looked like they were a second-tier team behind Oregon. It looked like Oregon was clearly, and I think I text you, I'm like, Oregon looks like the best team in the Big Ten, just the way they were playing defense, and the offense finally started to put it together, and then Penn State turns it on late. So my takeaway is what you called earlier, maybe last week or 2 weeks ago, like I don't believe in Penn State. We'll talk about this in our merit poll, but I didn't put them in there at all. I'm done. Until I see something different, that Ohio State game or Indiana later on in the season, I don't trust them. Now, from the Oregon standpoint.
Well, hold on. Before you get to Oregon, I have a couple thoughts on Penn State, because I think they're such a difficult team to figure out from a results perspective. And we talked about it a lot at the beginning of this year. We've talked about it through the first 4 or 5 weeks. The suspicion or the skepticism, maybe a better way of putting it, about this team. It's not born out of nothing. And, I always feel like you have to apologize when you're talking about Penn State or account for, well, gosh, they've won all these games. Last year, they deserve credit for making the college football playoff. They deserve credit for making the Big Ten title game. But, the head scratcher with Penn State is how many close games they're in. And you saw this last year. It wasn't just the 20-13 loss to Ohio State at home. It was also the 3-point win at USC. It was the 1-point win at Minnesota. They're just, the way that Franklin sets them up offensively doesn't do credit to what they can be with the level of talent they have. Is probably the easiest way I've come up with kind of trying to figure out how to describe it. And it's not like they're bad. I mean, they win so many games against teams that are as good talent-wise or less talented than they are. And, they've been so consistent here over the course of the last decade, essentially, in the Big Ten, in terms of they're always on the doorstep. They're just never able to walk through the door. And I just don't think Franklin is fundamentally able to change the way that he thinks about offense and play calling. And it's like conservatism because it works. And they're like a supercharged version of Iowa. It feels like Iowa with significant 4-star and 5-star talent, where they know that they can rock most teams to sleep. It's just when they play a team with exemplary athleticism, like Ohio State, like Oregon, like Notre Dame last year in the college football playoff, they never get blown out, or rarely do they get blown out, but they're never able to actually close the deal because they always feel like they're a step or two behind what the opposition coach is doing. And I don't think there's a way that you get around that. And they also really can't do anything about it because, like, James Franklin is far too successful as a Penn State coach to ever think about firing him.
Mm-hmm.
But for a team that considers itself one of the elite programs in college football, it's got to be really just psychologically damaging that not only are they behind Ohio State, not only did Michigan figure things out and win a national title before them, but now Oregon is in the Big Ten and looks like they are ahead of them in the pecking order because they've not only beaten them in Happy Valley, they also beat them in the Big Ten title game last year.
Right. Oregon has not lost the Big Ten game. I mean, they lost to Ohio State in the playoff, but they have not lost the Big Ten game yet, right? So they've come in here and taken their spot and probably are right behind Ohio State right now and probably the one in the pecking order of the Big Ten. But you're right. The James Franklin conundrum, you're right. He's not going to get fired. He's going to win 10 games again this year. Maybe not. Maybe he wins 9. But still, I mean, he's done it every year. He's been really consistent in doing that. And it's just baffling. Like, I'm curious if he went into that halftime tied at 3, where Oregon was playing certainly a little bit better. And you saw the cracks starting to form in Penn State, that he's like, okay, we're in this game. We're here. But they never, in the third quarter, is the same thing. Run, short pass to the outside and then punt. It was like, he's like, we're going to maybe win this game 6-3. That was maybe his mentality. And you have, if not the greatest home field advantage game in the sport, the whiteout, to your advantage, and you come out and you play like that, where if you can put up an early touchdown, Oregon's never been there before. They have no idea what that crowd can physically put together. It's got to be disappointing as a Penn State fan. It's just, at this point, it's got to be just baffling that they can't seem to beat one of these three teams. Right. Now they'll have the opportunity, like they have Ohio State later, and they also have Indiana, who is, we'll talk about them here in a second. It's because their next month is just, they should win the next two, and then they go to Iowa. So, not saying Iowa's certainly not a cakewalk. It's a tough place to play. It's the same brand of football, it seems like, but they should be 5-1 going to that Iowa game.
Yeah.
They're going to be a curious case. Now, if you want to look at from the Oregon standpoint, Oregon was really impressive. You go into the whiteout, you're up 17-3, you handle that game, and I understand Penn State came back, but Dante Moore looked like he was the real deal. Dan Lanning has continuously done this now for his 3 or maybe 4 years now, and the exact opposite. He has went in and he's blown the teams out that he was supposed to. The FCS teams, he blew out Oklahoma State. He puts his foot on the gas, and he gets his team ready for these big games. This is a hard, as I said, this is a hard place to play, and they went out there and did it, won the game, and now they're in a really good spot going forward for their chances at the playoff.
Yeah, it's been really impressive watching Oregon put it back together again after what a great season they had last year, where they go undefeated and win the Big Ten title game. Yeah, they stumbled in that Ohio State game in the playoff, but the rest of the season, I think they only had 2 games all season where they didn't score at least 31 points.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was that throwaway game against Idaho at the beginning of last year, and then the other one was that bizarre game at Wisconsin where they only won by 3, and everybody was like, are these guys good? They were good. This year's been more of the same, and Oregon, they're just so talented in terms of raw athletic talent, and I think Lanning deserves a ton of credit for knowing how to harness all of that. What's fascinating about Oregon to me is they host Indiana in 2 weeks. Both teams will be coming off a bye. They opened as like a 10.5-point favorite, Oregon did. And I think that's probably a little bit wide, but I think that line's going to probably settle around 8.5, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that's fair.
If they get through that game, and look, everybody knows, I think our Indiana affiliations, I'll pick Oregon in that game. I'm going to that game. I will still pick Oregon in it because I just think that they're the best team in the conference right now. But the rest of their schedule is at Rutgers, Wisconsin at home, at Iowa, Minnesota at home, USC at home, and at Washington. Now, at Washington, that's their blood rival, sworn enemy at this level of football.
Yeah.
But that's a really, really light schedule. They don't need to prove anything else.
No.
Even if they lose the Indiana game and win everything else on the schedule, they'll be 11-1, probably in the Big Ten title game. They'll have a lock for a playoff spot. The whole thing is interesting because they can now work on tinkering and refining what they're doing for the rest of the season. I think it's going to be interesting for them because at this stage, they look like a team athlete to athlete that can line up against any team in the SEC and probably have a superior collection of talent. And Lanning's already demonstrated an ability to coach at high levels in big games, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
So I'm really fascinated to see where Oregon goes. I would have kind of preferred that they lost this game simply because I would have liked a little more chaos in the Big Ten and everybody with maybe 1 or 2 losses at the end. But Oregon looks like really good value for the money moving forward as far as their overall prospects are concerned.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I was going to talk about their schedule a bit too. They have the one more game out east. The scheduling gods are on their side here. They go to Rutgers, which I don't expect, a big game, but certainly after that, they only go as far east as Iowa. As far east as Iowa, which again, that'll be a tough one because Iowa plays that style of football, and they always seem to play the top echelon pretty well. Yeah. They've set themselves up really well to probably be in the Big Ten championship again. And again, that's down the road, and like you said, there's still plenty of games, and there's going to be some upsets here from the middle of the Big Ten. We just haven't seen that yet, like in the SEC has been seeing that, not maybe not the middle, but their upper half is going to beat each other up a little bit more, it seems like.
Let's switch over to Alabama, Georgia. Alabama wins again against Kirby Smart and the Bulldogs in Athens, 24-21. Alabama looking for a get-right game against a really good opponent after that loss at the beginning of the year to Florida State. Well, they got one here. Tight game. Georgia probably could have kicked a field goal to send it into overtime. They chose to go for it on a late fourth down. Didn't happen for them. And you look at this Alabama team and you got to say, well, they look right again. As much as they had some shaky moments at the beginning of this year and certainly last year going 9-3 in the regular season, going into Athens and winning is probably the best win of the year. It eclipses Georgia's previous best win of the year. Maybe you could make the argument that Oregon going in to Happy Valley and winning that game is a bigger win. I'm not sure, though. I think that there's a debate there either way. But regardless, Alabama leaps right back into the SEC championship conversation. They're right back in the playoff conversation. And they did it without really, I think, coming across as overwhelming. They were just like slightly better than Georgia early, and they were able to ride that for the rest of the game.
One of the more incredible stats is Kirby's 88-9, and then he's 1-8 against or 1-7, whatever it is, against Alabama. It's baffling. A different coach, same team, and he still struggles. They lost their 33-game home win streak, for their first loss since 2019 at home. But for Bama, this puts them right back on the map. We talked about this after they lost the Florida State game. Is this a mirage? Is it just the perfect circumstance for Florida State? Based on what happened with Florida State this week, it certainly seems like that. Yeah. And now Bama's schedule, it lines up really well for them. I mean, I know they're hosting game day with Vanderbilt. That's interesting. I know what happened last year, but they have Vanderbilt and at Mizzou, Tennessee at home, at South Carolina. And based on how that's looked right now, Missouri's probably the toughest in there. Maybe, and they have Tennessee at home. Tennessee's look good. No, don't get me wrong, but it's breaking right for them for their home games, which I think that's really, really critical for Alabama. I really like Simpson. I think they finally found their quarterback. What's interesting is they scored 0 points in the second half and they still won this game. Despite all the noise of Alabama, it maybe will calm down a little bit on DeBoer here. It's the first time, people talk about this. I've never seen him like that, demonstratively upset, with referees, his players, and maybe he's feeling the pressure a little bit, but maybe he's like actually showing maybe a little bit more of his personality. I don't know, but it's really curious to see now how, and then we'll probably talk about this here in a second. The SEC is just going to, now with Georgia, now Bama has a loss, Tennessee has a loss, Bama doesn't have a loss in conference, but LSU has a loss. It's going to start really beating each other up here in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, we talked at the beginning of the season about how we both thought that the SEC was going to have a bunch of teams that were in that 10 to 12 win range. I had Georgia going undefeated in the regular season. That's out the window. Alabama, I think I had it 10-2, and those two losses did not include losing at Florida State to start the season. Mm-hmm. But, now you look down their schedule, like you said. I mean, Tennessee's a live wire. That's going to be fascinating to watch. Vanderbilt, as you mentioned, they look awesome. I think it's, they're 5-0 or something like that. LSU and Oklahoma are still lurking, but as you mentioned, Alabama gets all those teams at home. And the road games that they've got for the rest of the season that are noteworthy: at Mizzou, at South Carolina, and at Auburn. Mizzou is stronger than people thought. Yeah. The other two are weaker, although South Carolina did look okay this week, knocking off Kentucky at home. So you go down the rest of the list in the SEC, and you've had Ole Miss emerge now. They start the season 5-0. They pick up a big win at home against LSU. They've got to go to Georgia. They've got to go to Oklahoma. They've got to go to Mississippi State. I mean, but the nice thing for them is they've done themselves enough favors. They could lose 2 games and probably still be in pretty good shape for not just the SEC title game, but the college football playoff as well. There's just going to be a bunch of teams like that. Texas A&M is in that mix. Tennessee is still in the mix. A lot of teams that have their destiny in front of them. And honestly, like the team right now I'm looking at, and I'm like, they may have one really challenging game left on their schedule in terms of location is Texas, because they get Oklahoma, but they're at home. They get them in Austin. They get Vanderbilt in Austin. They got to go to Georgia, but they get Texas A&M at home, but that's also in Austin. Like they have a lot of, much like Alabama, I think their toughest games are going to be in an advantageous location for them. So it's going to be fascinating to see who can hold serve
Right.
in the conference. That's going to be a really interesting set of plot lines as we go into this next stage of the season.
Yeah, Texas is just they're playing. It's they're playing at the Cotton Bowl for.
I'm sorry. Right?
Yeah,
it's still in the state of Texas.
Yeah, you're fine. But it's curious too because people have stopped talking about Texas because they haven't really looked very good, but they have the opportunity to really pick it up here, and their schedule lines up. I mean, for the second straight year, I saw they're playing Oklahoma with a backup quarterback. It'll be their 8th backup quarterback they're going to face since joining the SEC. Which is unbelievable, right? In their 10 and their 10 conference games or whatever it's been so far. So in terms of Texas is kind of being forgotten about, but schedule wise, outside of maybe that game at Georgia, they should walk into that game at Georgia 9-1, 8-1. And that would not be a surprise just based on how things are going to break for them, right? It should break really well. Where the other teams, like you said, the Georgias, the Ole Misses, and Ole Miss is 3-0 in conference now. So they've already put their a leg up. The A&Ms, they're going to be fighting each other because they all have games against each other. So so those teams there's a 4 or 5 team grouping there that they have a lot of games against each other. With Texas, it lines up really well. They kind of had that last year too, where they couldn't lose any games. Like Texas really can't afford to lose any of these games. They have to win all of them, maybe outside of Georgia, to give themselves a chance at the playoffs. They can't go 10-2.
It's going to be fascinating to watch. And again, the question, Texas and Penn State, to me, feel very similar to each other. They've both not beaten anybody of note so far. They've both had suspect offenses. They're both still highly regarded by the metrics.
Yep.
And Penn State, even after that loss, is still 4th in S&P Plus. And they're still highly regarded in terms of FPI. They're 11th in FPI. Texas is kind of in the same boat where they're 13th in S&P Plus and 4th in FPI.
Yep.
So kind of mirror images of each other. Both of them still have plenty of opportunities to win games. But I think, as you mentioned, like Texas, they can't afford to lose a lot of games, but they also should be in a position where they're not going to be perhaps challenged as much. I am curious what Oklahoma can do even with a backup quarterback in the Red River Shootout, but it's going to be worth keeping an eye on. And I don't think like teams like Texas A&M or Vanderbilt or Mizzou are necessarily going away anytime soon either. So a lot of potential parity there, and it will call the question of how will the committee handle a bunch of potentially 3-loss SEC teams when they're all losing to each other? Will they handle them the same as 2-loss Big Ten teams? Because you could see a similar scenario play out in that conference, just with one less loss. That's going to be a really fascinating thing. And I think to some degree, it's how broad is the group of teams that are losing to each other? Because as we'll get to now in the Big Ten, the top level of the Big Ten feels like it might be stronger than the top level of the SEC. It's just that the SEC has more teams that could do damage to good teams in the SEC than the Big Ten seems to. So you look at what else happened in the conference in the Big Ten this week. We obviously mentioned Oregon, big win on the road at Penn State. Everybody was a little concerned about Ohio State at Washington. Washington had looked really frisky offensively.
Yep.
Ohio State
stopped
them cold, 24-6, the final. And Ohio State did not have to do anything else offensively beyond what they did. I mean, they got the winning margin in the second quarter, and that was it. Julian Sand, a very, very efficient game, 22-28 for 2 touchdowns in that game. And then you got Indiana going on the road, winning at Iowa, a place that, famously Jim Harbaugh said Kinnick was the place where top 10 teams go to die. Indiana almost died, but they figured out a way to squeeze out that win. They move into the top 10 of the AP poll this week. The one exception to this chain of road wins was USC, who had Illinois. They were leading 32-31 with 2 minutes to play. Illinois drives down the field, kicks a field goal as time expires, wins that. So Illinois back in the mix now at 4-1. USC's 4-1. And it kind of feels like that cluster of 5 or 6 teams at the top of the Big Ten is already starting to separate itself potentially from the rest of the pack.
Yeah, it seems like you have the clear top 4, right, or at least 3. Maybe I'm not sure where we're putting Penn State, but it seems like it's Indiana, Oregon, Ohio State, and then you would probably put Penn State, Michigan, Illinois, and USC. That next grouping, probably those next 4 is probably somewhere in there, maybe. So yeah, you're right. There is a clear delineation of what, and this is sort of what happened unsuspectedly last year, where there was a clear top 4, and I think this year we have a clear top 7. Maybe Nebraska will be a little frisky. Maryland's still 4-0, so it's really hard to really judge Maryland at this point. Maybe they are a team that's difficult to reckon with. But I think what we're going to see here, and certainly this is going to play out a little better than the Big Ten did last year, because the top teams are playing each other. So like you said, in 2 weeks, we have Indiana, Oregon, Indiana, Penn State still to play, Ohio State, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. So that's really good. And it's good for the conference, too, that we're getting these top games. It was really strange last year we didn't get a lot of them. In terms of the SEC, well, we were talking about the SEC, but in terms of the rest of the field, right, with Florida State losing that game to Virginia, it really makes it seem like it's a one-bid conference, assuming there's not an upset in the ACC championship, right? It seems like it's Miami, and I know Louisville's undefeated, so I think they're 5-0. Virginia is obviously frisky. I don't know if they can pull off a lot of wins. Georgia Tech's still 5-0, but it does seem like Miami and then everybody else in the ACC.
I think a lot of it's going to depend on how can any of those teams in that second echelon, which is a big second echelon in the ACC, actually string together the wins that you need. And so, it's like Virginia, great win against Florida State. The fact they already lost at NC State is that's a killer for them. That's a terrible loss. That's not going to look good at the end of the year. And Virginia goes to Louisville this week. Well, Louisville hasn't lost yet. Now, Louisville also has not played anybody, really. They did have a nice win at Pitt.
They came back, yeah.
They came back,
yeah.
But they basically killed Pitt in that game for the rest of the season. It's got 2 losses.
Yeah.
Miami's a fascinating case because, as we'll talk about in the merit poll and also the matchup coming up this week, all their business has been done at home. They got to go to Florida State. If they beat Florida State suddenly got 2 losses in conference and has 0 margin for error. They may even actually at that point be on the outside looking in. Miami is by far the best chance for this league to get a second bid, but that would require Miami going to the ACC title game and losing to whoever they play. And that's assuming Miami doesn't Miami themselves into 1 or 2 regular season losses along the way, which that just kind of feels like it's in the DNA of that program at this point. And even at Georgia Tech, they squeak out a win at Wake Forest this past week. And I mean, I give them a ton of credit for coming back. I give Georgia Tech a ton of credit for how gutty they have played over the course of the season. But I do think that it's worth noting that Georgia Tech's metrics are terrible. I think they're in the 30s right now. They barely beat Clemson, who doesn't look very good. They let Temple score 24 on them, and they've got to play Virginia Tech still at Duke, at NC State, at Boston College. They do not feel like a dominant enough team. As much as I heard people talking about on podcasts after, the games this weekend of like, well, they're going to be 11-0 or 10-1 going into the Georgia game. Statistically, I don't think that that's actually accurate. There's just going to be a lot of really fascinating things to watch in the ACC because it just doesn't feel like a particularly strong conference, as you mentioned. And, even Georgia Tech, FPI right now is projecting them with no ranked teams on their schedule other than Georgia at the end of the year as a 9-3 football team. That tells you something about the laws of averages,
Yeah. I mean, and it's funny you're saying like someone's got to play Miami in that game. We just rattled off all the teams and we don't know who it is. I mean, they do play Florida State this weekend. So it's a chance for Florida State maybe to rebound. It is in Tallahassee. So that's good. And then their other game is Louisville. And SMU has not been great, and Syracuse got shellacked this weekend. So they followed up that Clemson win really, really poorly. So yeah, I mean, Miami, you're right. As long as they don't Miami it, they should be in good shape. They don't leave the state of Florida until November. But this Florida State game will be interesting because there are 2 losses in conference, and then with there only being 8 conference games, someone else could pop in there and take that spot. Yeah, you're right. Georgia Tech. Is it Louisville? Is it Virginia? I mean, I don't know.
Well, there's an interesting knock-on effect that we can kind of close talking this week or talk. Well, I want to talk a little Big 12 first before we close out talking about this week. But the knock-on effect that's fascinating in how average or mediocre the ACC is from a depth perspective is how it affects Notre Dame. So Notre Dame did what they had to do, which was go out and get Arkansas's coach fired. It's funny because they almost did what Indiana did to Illinois, in that they made Arkansas look like a really bad team, which helps in the short term but hurts in the long term. And now Notre Dame is staring down a schedule where they may not play more than one, maybe two Power 4 conference bowl eligible teams and win against them. They've lost to Miami. They've lost to Texas A&M. So they don't have wins against either of those teams. And you go down the list and you see, well, gosh, they've got Boise State, who's not Power 4, NC State, USC, that's a team that'll probably almost make a bowl. But USC lost to Illinois. So USC is probably not going to be ranked by the time they play Notre Dame. That's a problem. And then you just go down the rest of the list. I don't see any of the teams that are on Notre Dame's schedule as threatening them, but their strength of schedule is going to leave them in the awkward position of essentially having to blow everybody out and then make the same argument that Indiana fans were making last year about Indiana's candidacy, which is, well, they might not have beaten any of the top teams, but they won by such a wide margin that they deserve entry into the college football playoff. And even then,
two losses.
You don't have nearly as good of an argument as Indiana had last year when they only had one loss, and Indiana beat 3 bowl teams out of the Big Ten.
Yeah, things are not – I mean, we talked about this before the season started. They had to win one of these first two, but it's broken worse than probably what they have probably expected. But you're right. They really need USC probably to go like 10-2 to really make this manageable.
I would not trust Lincoln Riley to go 10-2 at this point.
He doesn't go east and win. I mean, the last 2 years, I think he's 0-5 now or something or whatever it is. So – yeah, I mean, that November schedule, unless Pitt somehow turns around, and Q's just getting blasted yesterday. And we said they have a really difficult schedule, and
no quarterback.
And no quarterback. So to be fair, they're in a really difficult spot. But I mean, there's nothing on that in that November schedule. If they don't win each of those games outside of the Pitt game, probably by 20 to 25 points, you're leaving it up to the committee. And with a 2-loss Notre Dame, I just don't see it, especially when you're going to have these SEC teams. We're going to have 2 or 3 quality wins and maybe 9-3. And that's, we don't know what it's going to look like, but they're going to have a lot better results and their losses are going to be better. Or maybe the same equal. Yeah.
And as we talked about at the top of the Big Ten, where
same thing. Yep.
There's a very clear pathway where you could have Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, Indiana, and Illinois.
Absolutely.
All with 2 losses or fewer, and all with at least 1 win against the others. It's the real bad scenario right now for Notre Dame. Last ones I wanted to mention, the Big 12. Big 12 has, I would say right now, 3 teams, maybe 4, depending on how you feel about BYU, that feel like legitimate contenders for maybe sneaking in for an at-large. Iowa State, 5-0 on the season, 2-0 in conference. Arizona State, the more I look at them, the more I'm like, well, should they really have gotten knocked out of the poll for losing Mississippi State? Because Mississippi State looks pretty good right now. BYU, nice comeback win against Colorado on the road this week. And then, of course, Texas Tech has the big win on the road at Utah. This doesn't look as dire for the Big 12 as it did a couple of weeks ago, but it's still not a great-looking scenario because of how many of those teams have to play each other.
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned all the top teams. There's a lot – their top's a lot better than the ACC's in terms – maybe not in quality. I mean, it could be. We just don't know.
Right.
That there's going to be opportunities that there's a lot more opportunity for 10-2s, maybe some 11-1s there that they could get that second team in. And you mentioned, Arizona State probably deserves a lot more grace for losing the Mississippi State games. You're right. They probably should have won on Saturday against Tennessee. I mean, they had that game. It's unfortunate they lost, but I really like the way Arizona State looked this week. I really like the way Texas Tech looked, and Iowa State finally blew somebody out, which they needed to do this weekend. So it's good for the conference. It'll be really good if they can try to sneak a second team in there. It seems like maybe that's more plausible, especially with the Big Ten and maybe the SEC really beating up at each other, and the ACC maybe only having 1 win or 1 team, and Notre Dame maybe already played itself out of it. So you added all those factors in. The Big 12 is probably more in the mix for 2 than they originally thought.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll debut the merit poll for this week. We had some differences. We had some disagreements. We're going to talk through those, and then we'll preview what's coming up here in week 6. So stick with us on the other end of this break here on Football Weather.
Hoosier Nation, want a smarter take on IU sports? Then check out Crimson Cast, your go-to podcast for Indiana football, basketball, and beyond. Hosts Galen, Clavio, and Scott Caulfield bring you game previews, instant reactions, history, and context to make Indiana sports come alive. From the biggest moments on the field to the storylines shaping the future, Crimson Cast keeps you informed and connected. And after years of saying bring back the Bison, IU actually did it. So if IU listens to Crimson Cast, maybe you should too. Just search Crimson Cast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube.
Welcome back to Football Weather. Galen, Clavio, Matt Blaszka. It's time. Let's get this poll out, and we're going to dive right in. A lot of disagreement right off the bat here. So, Matt, I want to go through yours first. You've got Ole Miss number 1, Oregon number 2, Ohio State 3, Indiana 4, Miami 5. Rationale for putting Ole Miss at number 1 in the country in your merit poll?
I have just been impressed with Ole Miss. I climbed them quite a bit, but they have Kentucky this year. They have 4 really quality wins, including that Tulane, which is considered a top of 5 group of 5 favorite here. Blew them out, and then to beat LSU, who was ranked number 4 at the time. I just felt they probably had the best collection of 4 wins in the country. I'm going to give them the nod over Oregon and Ohio State, them both having 1 quality win, or maybe Ohio State has 2 now, but Oregon having the 1 for sure. And then a little bit ahead of Indiana, obviously the 3 Big Ten teams to follow. And obviously you went Oregon in a different route. So I'm curious why you have Ole Miss, I guess, down a little lower. Obviously I have a clump of 8 SEC teams from 6 to 11 essentially.
Right.
Just I couldn't figure out like who is the best in this group, and obviously I organized them a couple different times, but that's where I landed there.
Well, I'm still in a mode right now where I'm going to give more weight to the biggest win, the furthest away from home, and or wins against teams where I'm just really impressed with the quality of the victory. And so I looked at Oregon and I said to myself, well, Oregon now has a win at Penn State, which is a notoriously tough place to play. And you also add into that they have 2 additional wins over Power 4 competition, including 1 on the road. And I've just been really impressed at the way in which that they've won those games. And so it was back and forth. I mean, Ohio State, I think that Washington game perhaps is more impressive than people are giving it credit for, and you tie that in with the win at home versus Texas. I really went back and forth quite a bit about whether Oregon or Ohio State should be my number 1 because of that combination. Alabama I had up at 3, again, because they go into Georgia and win, and I think that's the best win right now that we've seen individually, maybe just narrowly eking out or pipping that Oregon win at Penn State. It's just that I like Oregon's body of wins a little bit better. It's funny because with Ole Miss, you say, okay, you think they've got the best collection of wins. I'm a little underwhelmed by the actual wins, though. They look great to some degree in terms of brand name, but if you go down the list for Ole Miss, I'm impressed that they've got 5 of them. But Kentucky, I just don't think has it. I think Stoops is likely, he will either get fired or probably should get fired if they actually had the money and the wherewithal to do it. Arkansas, despite being a top 40 team in both SP Plus and FPI, they just fired their coach. They clearly have some significant problems defensively. Tulane is essentially the equivalent of beating Colorado or Old Dominion. They're right in that same range, and that was a game that was at home. And then LSU, I just think is a really overrated team. Like the fact that LSU was 4th in the AP poll coming into this week was largely based upon the idea that they had wins over Clemson and Florida, both of which are 1 and 3, both of which, could very easily miss bowls this year. So, and again, I had Ole Miss 7th in my rankings. I had them just behind Georgia. I had Indiana 5th. I am leaning a little bit more on the higher end wins right now still, because I think that that's where the season is likely going to be won and lost, is those types of wins. Now, if Ole Miss pulls off one of those, which they'll have the opportunity to do, they've already got enough of a resume behind them. It'll probably vault them over everybody and into that first spot for me.
Yeah, and what's fun about Ole Miss here is I think I said earlier, they're 3-0 already in the conference, so they've already knocked out. That's a big deal when you are going down the list of games you have to still play. They go to Georgia in 3 weeks, but then their only other big road game is at Oklahoma State. Again, I wasn't projecting when I did this; I was just looking at the quality of wins. But certainly, it looks like they're going to put themselves in a spot that they will have a really good shot to go to Atlanta and play for the conference title. So I just want to point something out as we're talking about this. One thing I do is I scrap this each week. I'm not sure if you do the same thing. I start over like the committee says they do each week. We actually do it. And what was curious is we both had Oklahoma in our top 3 or maybe even 2, and we both significantly. So I'm curious why you did. I know why I did, but I'm curious why you did.
So my big problem with Oklahoma is I think they have one really good win at home against Michigan. But, and I give credit for home wins. It wasn't an overwhelming win. Like Indiana beating Illinois at home was an overwhelming win.
Mm-hmm.
I am less impressed by beating Auburn. And I think that Auburn is just one of those teams, kind of like Iowa, who can make games close. They will always look good statistically. You will beat them and it'll look great on your resume, but I question whether that's actually a good win. And the fact that they've done all of that work at home up to this point, I still have Oklahoma 12th. I just look at them and I say, as impressive as those wins were a week ago or 2 weeks ago when there wasn't a big body of work for other teams for us to look at, now that there is, those wins just look less impressive comparatively speaking because of where they happened in the case of Michigan and how they happened in the case of Auburn.
So bingo. That's exactly what I was hoping you would say, because that's why we do this merit poll, because last week they were, right? And now things have changed around them. Certainly the quarterback getting hurt certainly maybe puts a small factor, and I still don't have Michigan ranked. I still need to see a little more, but Auburn, losing at A&M, and now I think they only put up 10 points. I never even had them in my top 10, but it just shows that there needs to, like, what we're doing compared to maybe the AP or the ESPN is we're being really thoughtful of what's happening week to week. Right. So like Ole Miss, yeah, maybe you don't agree with their number 1, but they certainly have an argument that they're maybe one of the top 4, 5, 6, 7 teams, right? At this point, if you look at this top 8 teams, they now all have a big win this season. And maybe it's not a top 10 win anymore, but the top 8 all have that now.
Well, and this is why, for instance, you didn't have Illinois in your top 20. I had Illinois 10th. Now, the reason I did that was, yeah, they got blown out by Indiana, but that Duke win on the road is starting to look a little more impressive. As Duke, I think, they've started undefeated in the ACC. They're in the top 50 in FPI, and they're close to it in S&P Plus. You add in that they just beat USC at home, and USC, by every metric, had one of the best offenses in college football, and Illinois was able to outduel them in that game. So I think those are 2 really good wins for Illinois. I think there's you can interpret these things differently, and I'm certainly on board with the idea that we can value things in a different way. But yeah, my thought process is ultimately I try to go through and just think about, well, looking at all of the criteria fresh every week, what now sticks out. And again, I think as we go into this next week, I probably will drop Alabama back down some if Georgia struggles a bit. Or, certainly if Alabama loses to Vanderbilt, I think that both kind of changes the way I would think about both Alabama and Georgia. So these are the kinds of things I think you got to do. It gets progressively harder to some degree as the season goes along because it's hard to give up your preconceived notions of individual teams and how good they are and how they're playing. But I've enjoyed this process. And I've even got this chart that I've created where I'm like trying to track like where the wins are and what the rankings are on a week-to-week basis. Because I keep going back to LSU. LSU got ranked relatively high in the preseason poll because people thought they would be good. and then they beat Clemson on the road, and it's like, wow, that's incredible. What a win. That win looks less and less impressive every week. You throw the Florida win on top of it, that win looks less and less impressive every week. So why are we doing what the AP poll has done and just keeping them in a spot because, quote unquote, well, they haven't, nothing's happened that would knock them down from that. Well, that's not true, because if you're reevaluating your original criteria on these things, plenty's happened where you could knock them down on that. You're not a slave to what you put in there before simply because you don't want to change things.
Right. Like if we went into this after the Alabama loss and never put him back in, right? Or sorry, when Alabama lost to Florida State and just kept Florida State at the same spot, we wouldn't be doing our due diligence of what's happened since then. It's been a month since that moment. Alabama looks like they are trending up, and now Florida State looks like they're backsliding. While that, I think we were texting back and forth during that Florida State game. While a fun game, you can't lose a game to Virginia. With that said, Virginia has looked a lot better this year than in previous seasons.
Right.
But still, that has to weigh, because now you're weighing that Florida State loss or that Florida State win or loss differently, similar to LSU. Clemson's not on this list anymore. So the LSU win has to keep going down in terms of what it looks like. It just doesn't look the same.
Well, and I think even more so, you mentioned not having Penn State in your top 20. I don't have them in mine either. I'm baffled that Penn State is still in the top 10. They're seventh in the AP poll for what? Like, I mean, and this is where it's such a dangerous game. There's kind of two primary issues. One is this idea of like, well, I just think this team is better than that team. It's like, well, that's where you get into trouble.
We did this last year.
We did.
Look what happened. Yeah.
But the other thing, and this is something that I think everybody falls into this trap when it comes to college football, because there are so few data points. The transitive property just doesn't work well in college football. And again, it's like Illinois goes and beats Duke handily. Does that mean that Duke is now terrible? Maybe, or maybe not. Because if Duke turns around and wins a game somewhere, well, are they suddenly good again? You'll see this a lot in the SEC. Georgia goes and beats Tennessee at Tennessee. You got to take that into account. But them losing at home to Alabama may not necessarily mean anything more than just they were not that good that day, but they'll be perfectly fine down the line. And it's hard to dial this stuff in, but I would rather make the error of saying, all right, let's look at the actual wins and losses and rate teams accordingly, rather than let's look at the wins and losses, but I've got a preconceived notion in my head that this team is good and this team is not good, and that's going to be the trump card. And that's where I get really frustrated with the way that a lot of voters in the AP poll especially decide that they're going to go along, this whole process. Because, for instance, one of our favorite things to pick on has been the way that certain voters have decided that they're going to deal with Notre Dame. So Notre Dame continues to get votes from certain people in the poll. Like, I'm going to zero in on Kirk Kenny, who's with the San Diego Union Tribune. Kirk Kenny voted Notre Dame 9th this week. 9th. How are they 9th? Yes, they have two close losses to teams that are pretty good. They've got to win against Purdue at home, and they've got to win against a really bad Arkansas team that just fired their coach on the road. They are ranked ahead of Alabama. They're ranked ahead of Georgia. They're ranked ahead of Oklahoma. They're ranked ahead of Indiana. These are all teams that have actually won games.
Right.
And so what is Kirk Kenny going to keep voting Notre Dame 9th if they win the rest of the games on their schedule and then don't make the college football playoff? Is he going to, this is also a guy that has LSU 8th in this poll.
After losing to
Ole Miss, which is baffling to me. If you take the rest of the criteria in place. And to me, the largest issue with this goes back to what I just said. It's this idea. It's like the problem. People complain about preseason polls. And I would say the preseason polls themselves are not the problem. The problem is voters refuse to acknowledge new data that doesn't agree with their preconceived notions.
Yeah.
And that leads to the kind of muck that you've got, where you've got some voters voting Notre Dame 9th. You've got other voters voting Notre Dame 25th. You've got some voters, Garland Gillen, is one of several voters that had IU 4th. You've got other voters that have IU, 15th or 16th. And I'm not saying that everybody's got to vote the exact same. What I am saying is, like, if your preconceived notions of a team are trumping the actual results,
right?
When do the results matter ultimately? And that does have an effect on the framing of the way that people think about these teams writ large. And I do think that that's an issue.
And it's okay to have those preconceived notions for maybe the first 2 weeks, because you really don't know unless you're playing that big team. And I'll just use us as a reference point. In week 2, we both had Penn State. I had them at 10. You had them at 11. Week 3, I had them at 14. You had them unranked from that point forward. And then last week I had them at 14 again, and you still had them unranked. And now we both have them off, right? Because we've seen enough. Well, you saw enough earlier on, but I saw enough. Like, this team is not a top 20 team. They have 3 FCS, well, whatever they are, FBS, FCS, lower division teams, and a loss to Oregon at home in the best home environment in college football.
Yep.
What have you shown that you're a top 20 team? And what voters watched that game on Saturday and thought Penn State looks great? They had 60 yards of offense in the middle of the third quarter. Like, I mean, yes, they came back, and certainly give them credit for that. But it was 17-3 late into the fourth at home against. Come on, let's be serious here.
Right. Well, my thing is, ultimately, if you think Penn State's that good, great. Why don't you wait till they win games against good competition and then vote them there? That's the thing that I've never really understood about this.
Yep.
Don't hold a spot for them. Like wait till they're winning games and deserving it, and then, because I've got USC, Utah, Texas, and Penn State. None of them made my top 20 this week. I had BYU in there because BYU picked up a nice win against Colorado. I didn't have them in there last week. I have Georgia Tech in there, even though I don't really think Georgia Tech is a top 20 team, but they've won games.
They won 5 of them.
Right. So that just feels like a more logical way of going about this. The other thing I'll note, and we talked about this, I think, last week, and I've heard this mentioned elsewhere. And again, it goes back to this idea of what is it you're ranking teams on? If you're ranking them on notions, on preconceived ideas, on narratives that you've constructed, what are those narratives? I think you should have to. It's kind of like, I've always felt this way about restaurant reviews. I feel like if you're going to write a restaurant review, I should be able to click a little button and read about what your preferences are for restaurants and what kind of food you like, and what you think.
What's your order?
Yeah, exactly. Because the same thing with like hotels.
Yeah.
When you read reviews of hotels and someone's complaining because the linens weren't done properly, I was like, okay, like I get the idea of who we're dealing with in that.
Things happen. Yeah, things happen. It's okay.
But here's the thing that gets me. The votes are due Sunday morning early, and we've already covered how almost nobody in college football media can adequately go watch all of the games of the teams that they're supposed to be ranking, because they're all covering games in most cases. And, there's some people that aren't covering games individually necessarily, but most of them are at a game.
Sorry, I'll say, and think about this past week. I assume most of the big writers were at the Alabama game or the Penn State game. I'm making an assumption, but I assume a lot of the voters were.
Which means they didn't see the other games since they were happening simultaneously. But my point isn't even that.
Okay,
my point is, we have 3 quality power metric systems that you can use as an independent criteria to understand the relative strengths of different teams: offense, defense, special teams. We have FPI, which is ESPN's proprietary stat. We have S&P Plus, which is Bill Connolly's stat. We have FEI, which is another really good tool. They all come out Sunday late morning. S&P Plus didn't come out until 4:00 this afternoon because of a data error. FPI came out at like 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. If you're going to be voting, why not wait until I'm not talking about writers here. I'm talking about the AP. Why doesn't the AP wait until those things are out to at least give your writers a chance to look at the metrics and make decisions based upon that in some degree? I'm not saying you have to base your voting entirely off of those metrics, but I would think it'd be a helpful data point, especially if you're not able to watch the games.
Well, and it can't be that hard nowadays to submit a ballot and it automatically generates the top 25 in about 15 seconds, right? Like I just can't imagine it's that hard anymore. Like, you can't wait till 9 p.m. today, right now, essentially. And by 9:30, you have the poll. Like, you'd maybe do some checks, balances. Who cares who's first? I'd rather see it get right, and then you actually have some real metrics. And then you actually can trust the people that are voting that they're actually watching, or at least went back and watched the games. Like, there's no way anybody who was covering that Penn State game watched any other game or just they looked at the score and said, okay, that team's, we're moving that one up, that one down. That's how it's going to look. That was it. Right. So, and I can't blame them for that. If they don't have time to actually look at the ballot the next day, they don't. Anyway.
No, I mean, again, I think we mentioned this last week. Why not move the poll to Monday?
Right.
Why do it on Sunday? Like, what are you getting out of it? You're not even trying. I mean, I think even in the original formulation, you weren't getting that into the Sunday paper. The Sunday paper's printed Saturday night.
Right. Yeah.
There's no paper to print at this point. You're doing it on Monday anyway.
Right.
If you're aiming for printed editions, so why not just have the vote due Monday morning? Give everybody 24 hours to evaluate things.
Yeah. And have that water cooler talk at first thing in the morning on Monday. Yeah, it'd be the same. It'd be just a lot better fodder, and people would take it more seriously. But it's difficult to take seriously when this person, I forget who it was rating Notre Dame number 9 with 2 wins one against Arkansas and the other is against, I don't know. Purdue. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Purdue. Great. That's a great win.
Yeah. Anyway, let's move on to the final segment of things. Let's talk about this upcoming week.
Yeah.
And we've got a less impressive slate of games is how I would phrase this upcoming week. There's not really anything noteworthy on Thursday. In fact, there's nothing that you can skip Thursday night's game. It's Sam Houston and New Mexico State. Just this is it's a great pumpkin patch night is how I would describe that. Not really anything going on Saturday. BYU plays on Saturday, but they're hosting West Virginia. That's not going to be very competitive. So let's jump ahead to Sunday. And just kind of picking through a few games I think are noteworthy. Iowa State, 14th in the country, 5-0. They can get to bowl eligibility, but they got the travel to Cincinnati. This is an Iowa State team that has kind of ridden the wave of some good luck. They've exceeded what their metrics say they should have been, looking at in terms of their overall record. Cincinnati's frisky, and Cincinnati is actually a 1.5-point favorite in this game. Brendan Sorsby's played very well throughout the course of this season. It's going to be a tough battle for Iowa State, but one that they have to win. I think if the Big 12 has got to harbor serious ambitions of having multiple bids in the college football playoff this year.
Yeah, you hope that Iowa State can build off their really big blowout win against Arizona last week. But you're right, Cincinnati, they played Nebraska really tough in the opener, and they played well. Those games always scare me when Vegas has that 1.5 point or 2.5 point favor going to the home team. That they're okay, but they're not that great. Yeah, this is a trap game for Iowa State if they're not ready. And I'm guessing they'll be the first team to bowl eligibility if they win. At this point, they have to be, right?
Yeah, I think so. They're one of a few teams that could get to 6-0 this week with a win. Another one of those teams is Vanderbilt, and that's the premier 3:30 game. They travel to Alabama. Now, of course, famously last year, Vanderbilt knocks off Alabama, and that wasn't the game that necessarily knocked Alabama out of the college football playoff, but it certainly didn't help. Now, this year, Vanderbilt looks far more legit than they did last year. Diego Pavia, 1,211 yards throwing so far, 13 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He has looked legitimate. And, I mean, Vanderbilt, this is it's funny you say, like, it's not your father's Vanderbilt. Like, Vanderbilt has these clusters of years where they do very well. James Franklin, when he was there, they played very well. But Vanderbilt outscoring their opponents 49-17. And while they haven't beaten a ranked team, they did blow out South Carolina on the road. This is a team that is not going to be scared of playing Alabama, given that they beat Alabama last year. And, you look at FPI, and Vanderbilt is right up there. They're projected to be about a 9-3 team right now. But in terms of the way that they have played so far, they have the number 1 rated offense, according to FPI, in the entire country. Like, that just shouldn't be happening. They have, and it's not just FPI, they have the 6th rated offense, according to S&P Plus. Their defense is not as good. Their defense is only 29th in the country. Alabama, weirdly, is the more balanced team in this matchup. And obviously, it's at Bryant-Denny Stadium.
Yeah.
It helps a great deal. Alabama's a 10.5-point favorite in this game. I don't know if that feels a little high at this point, but this is one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and I just looked it up. I knew they followed a big game, or Alabama had a big game the week before. Alabama played Georgia the week before they lost to Vanderbilt. So same scenarios last year. The big emotional game. This one was just as emotional as it was last year when they beat Georgia. So Vanderbilt comes in, like you said, the best offense, one of the better offense in the country. It's such a world we live in that Vanderbilt and Indiana are both ranked in the top 20 right at this point in 2025. It's great. I mean, it's really great for the sport that you're seeing these two bottom dwellers being very good at the sport.
And Iowa State, too, who's not a bottom dweller, but I mean, all three teams in their next game could get to bowl eligibility as quickly as possible, which is nuts to think about. Some other games of note also in the 3:30 window. Virginia and Louisville. We just talked about this. Virginia's 4-1. They got ranked. They're 24th. Louisville not ranked, but they're just on the outskirts. They're 4-0. A lot on the line. I don't know what you want if you're the ACC here. Do you want Louisville to remain undefeated? Do you want Virginia to build off the momentum and get to 5-1 in the conference? I think this will be a fun game. Louisville's a 5.5-point favorite in this game. And I would definitely take Louisville in this because that is a hell of an emotional high to have to come down from if you're Virginia. And we just saw with Indiana this last week, huge win against Illinois, the classic letdown game. And Jeff Brom's a really good coach. I mean, Louisville's going to be ready to go on this one.
Yeah, I'm really curious if Virginia can back this up, right? They have looked really good. They lost to NC State late in that game. They put up 700 yards of offense and lost that day. So that's really difficult to do. But if they can somehow win this game, I'm on you. I think Louisville's probably the better team here. But it sets up pretty nice if they can get this Louisville win. They have Washington State. Washington State I think it's their homecoming game on the 18th. That's an interesting homecoming game. But then they go to North Carolina, to Cal, Wake Forest home. It sets up that I'm not projecting Virginia's going to go to the ACC championship, but certainly it's a nice turn for a program that's had a really difficult couple of years. That if they get this one, they're going to put themselves in a really good spot.
A stealth game out of the Big Ten. Washington at 3-1 has to go east, and they take on Maryland. Now they escape the noon window, so they're playing at 12:30 body time. Maryland big win last week, or they had a bye last week.
2 weeks
ago, big win at Wisconsin, moved them to 4-0. Washington really needs to win this game if they want to stay in contact with the leaders in the Big Ten. I mean, and this is a Washington team, I think, that people were curious to see what they would do. They looked so impressive offensively in the first 3 weeks, and they need a bounce back. They have a relatively tough schedule the rest of the way. They still got to go to Michigan. They got Illinois at home. They got Oregon at home. And then they've still got to travel back east to Rutgers and to Purdue on top of, they've got those at home. My mistake. They got to travel to Wisconsin. Is their other East Coast-ish game, even though Wisconsin's very much not on the East Coast of anything. They're on the West Coast of Lake Michigan. Or maybe, whatever. You know what I mean? Washington needs to win this game. Maryland needs to win this game because Maryland, if you look at their run out, they have a real good shot at being 7-0 going into their home game against Indiana if they can knock off Washington and then knock off Nebraska. Like that's for a team that looked dead in the water, or a program that looked kind of dead in the water last year. This is a really intriguing opportunity for Maryland. I'm curious. This game I'm really going to be keeping an eye on because I have no idea what to expect out of it. Right now, it's Washington, a 5.5-point favorite at Maryland.
Going east.
I mean, that I got my head scratching genes going on that one. That's a little bit odd.
Considering they only scored 6 points last week, that's pretty interesting. But again, it's really hard to doubt Vegas. Yeah, from what I said, it was really difficult to watch Washington last week after they were really, really played well those first couple weeks, and their offense looked good. But Ohio State's defense just looks, it might be the best defense in the country at this point, the way they're playing. So maybe that's one you throw away and say, it's the best. It's Ohio State. But you're right. This is an interesting game because one of these two teams is going to be near that middle, and certainly Maryland has a chance. Well, Nebraska then at UCLA. Oh, you're right. Okay, then they play Indiana. So yeah, you're right. So 7-0 is really much in the mix to get to that game, and then they don't play Oregon, Penn State, or Ohio State. They don't play any of those three teams. So certainly Indiana is going to be their one chance to get a really big ranked win. I know they have Illinois too. I missed that one, but certainly they have an opportunity to really put their marker down in the Big Ten this year.
undefeated matchup in the Big 12 in the 7 o'clock window. Texas Tech, ranked 11th now, traveling to Houston. Willie Fritz has that team off to a 4-0 start. It's a 12.5-point spread in favor of Texas Tech. Houston's a little bit dangerous. I would be concerned about this game if I was Texas Tech. Texas Tech has looked certainly good, but I do think it's kind of interesting that when you look at Texas Tech and what they've done so far, like their efficiency numbers are incredible. They have one of the best defenses in college football, but they're 20th in FPI even with that. So they need to kind of match what their efficiencies are showing with what they're doing on the field throughout. They looked nice in that win at Utah. Houston looking for their first big win of the season. I think it's going to be an interesting game, and one that, again, I think if Texas Tech wins, it's a good thing for the Big 12. If Houston wins, it kind of throws the whole thing into a bit more chaos. Not that Houston couldn't go on a run, because their schedule is relatively favorable down the stretch. They've only got to go to Arizona State. That's the only game that really stands out as one that could be like really overwhelmingly difficult. But one to keep an eye on, I think, in that 7 o'clock window.
Yeah, this is a team neither of us had pegged, but they had a really nice win at Oregon State the other night. Oregon State fumbled that game. I watched a little bit of that game. Oregon State was controlling it early, but Houston came back late to win it. And they beat Colorado, so they have a nice win there as well. You're right. If they actually somehow win this game against Texas Tech at home, the schedule bodes well to make some noise. I don't know if I'm on board with Houston right now, but certainly it puts them in a position to at least. I mean, they'll be 5-0, chance to. Who knows? Oklahoma's chance to be the rest of the year with no coach and no defensive coordinator now. It's certainly going to be wide open for them. But yeah, it's a big game for the Cougars, and Texas Tech needs to keep it rolling. They have looked so good. They look really good so far.
Mississippi State at Texas A&M. It's been a great start for Texas A&M. I think their first 4-0 start in like 9 years or something like that. But Mississippi State's looked good as well. Big spread in this one, 13.5 point spread in favor of Texas A&M. But Mississippi State, a bit dangerous. I'd be careful there if I was Texas A&M, especially when you consider that A&M's got a bunch of other things coming up not long after this that they're going to need to be focusing on. Easy to overlook, Mississippi State, but you really ruin your season if you don't take them seriously. And so that's going to be one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, like I said earlier, they were in the driver's seat for that whole game. It's disappointing they didn't pull it out, especially they've had a couple tough years as well. This is not a walk. This is not a walk in the park. They beat Auburn, and from the bits and pieces I saw, they didn't look great. But they have to get this one if they want to have a chance come to November.
And of course, the last but not the least game by any means, the premier game of the day from a rankings perspective, number 3 Miami at number 18 Florida State. It feels like it's been a while since this game meant as much as it looks like it might mean this time around. Miami's a 4.5 point favorite on the road. Carson Beck's looked pretty good so far this season, but I was actually kind of lost in the shuffle of that Virginia game. I was actually really impressed with how Florida State looked offensively. Mm-hmm. And, look, road games are tough. Virginia's not a complete pushover. Those are games that you can certainly lose. But I think Florida State is the type of team that can bounce back and they can put a ton of points on the board. And we've just seen Miami tend to struggle sometimes in games where they have to deal with a team that doesn't fold up the tents. Yeah. And so I'm really curious to see how all this is going to play out. I would probably still lean towards Miami, but I'm really curious about Florida State's positioning in this one and what they might be able to do. Right now they are actually ranked ahead of Miami in terms of FPI efficiencies. They're 6th in FPI and overall efficiencies. They have the 5th ranked offense in the country. Miami's offense hasn't looked that good. They're only 23rd in the country in offense. Their defense has been pretty good. So look, I wouldn't be shocked at all if Florida State pulls off the victory. It'd be great for Florida State, would vault them right back into the playoff picture. Yeah. It would certainly hurt the ACC in terms of the holistic picture of things.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. If Florida State can somehow get this, they would have 2 somewhat top 10 wins, right? Bama would certainly in the top 10, and Miami would probably be on the fringe if not stayed in it. And at the end of the day, they'd have the 2 biggest games on their schedule they won. And that is going to really matter if they happen to drop another one down the stretch, or maybe even drop 2, like maybe have those 2 really, really big wins. Where on the other side, as you mentioned, Miami has not leaving the state till November, but certainly this is the one where they can basically knock Florida State out because or maybe not out completely, but certainly with all the tiebreakers and everything else, it's going to put them in a really tough spot for Florida State to come back. So I'm curious to watch this one too. I'm with you. I lean towards Miami, but I wouldn't be surprised after what happened to them last week against Virginia and Florida State got off the map because you're right, they did score. I mean, they were down 14-0, and before you know it, boom, it was 21-14 Florida State. So certainly they'll be able to put up points. And Cristobal, as we said, has that one game that always seems to just end their season or put them in a really difficult spot. So we'll see how Miami comes out.
Well, and the one nice thing for Miami is that losing this game would not end their season.
Right.
Because they've got that Notre Dame win, and that's going to carry weight throughout the course of the season because the pollsters will ensure that Notre Dame is never not ranked.
Top 10 Notre Dame.
And Miami, it's right. Miami still, they get to play Louisville at home. They get to play Syracuse and NC State at home. They've got a game at Pitt. I mean, the schedule just sets up so nicely for them that they'd have to, I think, lose a second game to really be out of contention. But I would say if they want to be safe, don't lose this game. And we'll see what happens. But
I'm with you.
Yeah. Anyway, that'll wrap it up for us. Any final thoughts before we go?
No, a great week 5. We all thought it was gonna be great, and it certainly played out that way. Week 6, a little lighter, but as much as we love college football, every game matters, and that's what you got to remember.
Exactly. We'll be back to talk about all of the other games that matter coming up next week. We'll have another episode of Football Weather coming up as we recap what is going on here, and we really get into the meat of things as October, once it really gets rolling. I mean, you know how this goes, folks. It's game after game after game. Once you get into the month of October, we'll have like a nice 8-9 week stretch where it's just going to be on a rocket's trajectory to see what happens in the college football playoff and beyond. So, as always, a pleasure talking with you, Matt, and a pleasure to have you folks joining us here on the show. We'll be back next week with more. For Matt Blaszka, I'm Galen Clavio. This is Football Weather. We'll catch you on the flip side. So long, everybody.